Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today is day 2 of Bloomburrow spoiler season. Can you believe it? We are in full swing. Not as many cards today. They're kind of starting to trickle out now. Yesterday we had an absolute metric ton of cards, so if you missed yesterday's video, I'm going to make sure and link that in the description and in the pinned comment. Check that out because there are a ton of cards in that video, but all of the ones that aren't in that video that have been released today, we're going to cover in this video right here. Before we do that, make sure you like the video if you haven't already because it helps me get this video out to so many more people and helps the channel grow. And it's you guys that are liking every video that has helped this channel to grow so quickly. We just hit 10,000 subscribers and I have some crazy huge things to share with you soon, but let's get through the spoiler season first, right? So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. If you're new here, subscribe so you never miss an upload. Tons of crazy spoiler content coming, tons of cool deck techs. I've already started scheming and brewing some ideas in my head for decks for Bloomburrow, so it's gonna be a pretty interesting couple of months. But first up here, we've got Brambleguard Captain. This is 1 red and 3 for a 2/3 mouse soldier, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is Brambleguard Captain's power. So this is sort of another payoff card for, we've seen a lot of Valiant in this set already, which is kind of like a new version of Heroic. So being able to target your creatures to trigger Valiant is also setting you up with spells that can buff your creatures, presumably, in which case being able to buff something like Brambleguard Captain here is going to allow you to additionally buff another target creature at the beginning of combat. So kind of a cool little ability here that synergizes with some of the other stuff that the set is doing. Might be a nice little include in Limited. I don't expect this to be good enough in Constructed, but still a pretty cool card. Mouse Tribal, let's go. Next up, we've got Bright Blade Stout. And this is not a mouse. This is a 2/2 Weasel Soldier with First Strike and Lifelink for 1 white and 1. So what I like about this card is it's not necessarily in a lot of the tribes or any of the tribes that White is associated with in this set in particular. So White has 4 different tribes that it's mainly going to have creatures in, and each of those tribes sort of has a color pair that goes along with it. And Weasel is not one of them. So I feel like what they did with this card is they gave us a creature that's just good all around, that's just generally better than a lot of the other creatures that you're going to see in the uncommon slot for 2-drops, but the downside being it doesn't fit into any of the archetypes, any of the tribal stuff that White is typically trying to do. So if you have any lords or any tribal buffs or any tribal synergies that you're trying to build a deck around, your Weasel doesn't necessarily get any advantages from that kind of stuff, but to make up for it, it's just kind of a better on-rate all-around creature in general. So pretty interesting here, where most of the set seems to be tilted towards pushing you to go into synergistic tribals and really taking advantage of using specific tribes, and this card is kind of the other side of the coin to that. But either way, really good body as a 2/2 First Striker with Lifelink. We've come a long way since White Knight, so pretty cool card. Next up, we have Manifold Mouse, which is also our first rare of the day. This is a 1/2 Mouse Soldier for 1 red and 1, which seems kind of below rate until you look at the other abilities. It has Offspring 2, which means as you cast the spell, you can pay an additional 2 mana, and if you do, as this creature enters the battlefield, you get to create another 1/1 token copy of this creature. What's cool about this ability is the token copy is still technically the creature. It has the same name, it even technically has the same mana cost, and it also has all of the abilities of the original creature. It's just a token, and it's 1/1 instead of whatever the power and toughness is, in which case this being a 1/2. So the other ability here, at the beginning of combat on your turn, target mouse you control gains your choice of Double Strike or Trample until end of turn, is actually really relevant, because not only does that make this a much better 2-drop, it can come down and give whatever the better keyword is to an attacker that turn, and then continue to do so on every subsequent turn. But if you happen to draw this a little bit later in the game, you can pay the offspring cost with, you know, dump your extra mana into that if you don't need to cast other spells. And then you have 2 of these, and each of these are triggering, which means you could give 2 different mice, double strike until end of turn, or give 1 mouse double strike and trample until end of turn. So I like the versatility of being able to play this early and just use this as a way to hand out really good keywords every single turn, but also have extra value later in the game, giving you 2 bodies for just 1 card and double the abilities. So really interesting card. It's almost on the surface appears like it won't be good enough for constructed, but I think the fact that it's a mouse, the fact that it's a soldier matters a lot, and I feel like some of these cards look like they're not quite there, but in reality, once we see the full set spoiled, we're going to realize that cards like this are absolutely there, and there's some pretty crazy things you can do, but we're going to have to wait until the entire set is spoiled before we know for sure. Next up, we have Consumed by Greed, an instant for 2 black and 1, and as you play it, you can gift a card. What that means is you promise an opponent a gift, in this case a card, as you cast the spell, and if you do, then you have to let them obtain that gift before the rest of the card resolves. So, in this case, you're gifting a card, which means they get to draw a card. So before you get to do whatever else the spell is doing, they're going to get to draw a card if you decide to gift a card. You don't have to. And then the target opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control, and that happens no matter what, but if the gift was promised, you also return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This can be really powerful. Not only is this a 3 mana instant speed, get their biggest dude off the board no matter what, regardless of a gift, but having the option of letting them draw 1 card in order to get your best creature back from the graveyard and replay it can be really, really good under certain circumstances. Sometimes the card advantage is going to be very detrimental for you and you can just choose not to do it, but sometimes them drawing 1 card isn't going to matter if you're returning a creature to your hand that is going to get you 2 for 1 or 3 for 1 value, some absolutely back-breaking card that you're going to be able to recast and take over the game with. In that case, letting them draw a random card and hoping to God that maybe it's something that can deal with the threat that you're bringing back, just tacked on, just tacked on to already making them lose their best creature, just seems bananas. But I don't know. Let me know if you agree in the comments. Seems really good for an uncommon to me. Moving on, we've got Valley Rally. This is 1 red and 2 for an instant. And as you play it, you can gift a food, which means you'll promise them a gift and they'll create a food token as you play this. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn, and if the gift was promised, target creature you control gains first strike until end of turn as well. So I kind of like this. Gifting them a food isn't going to do a whole lot for them, especially if they're not synergizing or you know, building into a food style archetype. But having the option of like, oh, I could give you this irrelevant little artifact in order to give my guy first strike so that he survives combat and your guy dies could be super, super crucial. So just having that as an option I think is really, really cool. And if the food's going to be really good for them, you can just not. You can just buff up your whole team by +2/+0 and choose not to give the first strike. So I kind of like these gift spells because I think the versatility is going to get overlooked and be similar in power level to charms, whereas historically charms, when they first were introduced, got very undervalued because each of the modes on a charm did something that wasn't quite worth the mana, and it wasn't until really playing with charms and really realizing the true power of the versatility of getting to choose the best mode in the moment that charms got the respect that they were due. And I feel like these cards where you can gift are in a similar way where you don't have to do the gifts, so you have options available to you and you can do the best thing in the moment. And in that way, I think this card is actually a little bit better than it even looks. But next up, we've got Mabels Metal. This is 1 white and 1 for an instant, and target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Also, up to 1 other target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So, a cool little combat trick where you're able to target 2 different creatures with just 1 spell, And I think where this is the most relevant and will probably be overlooked at first is the fact that we have the Valiant keyword in this set, which is a new version of Heroic, which puts +1/+1 counters on creatures that have the Valiant ability whenever they become targeted by a spell or ability. So being able to play this and target 2 different creatures is huge, because if both of those creatures have Valiant, now each of those creatures gets to trigger their Valiant ability with just the casting of 1 spell. And I think that's what makes this card really, really good. And I think this is kind of a sleeper, and it's going to slide under the radar until people realize just how much they can pop off with their Valiant abilities. So I think that's where this card shines. Outside of that situation, it's just okay. It's an okay combat trick. But again, the decks that are going deep into Valiant and Limited, I think are going to love a card like this, and I think it's going to be a much higher pick for those decks. Next up, we have Sunspine Lynx. This is another rare. It's a 5/4 elemental cat for 2 red and 2, so already a pretty decent on-rate body. Players can't gain life at all, period, and damage can't be prevented at all, period. That seems pretty good already, right? But then it has another ability. When Sunspine Lynx enters, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. This thing is just punishment on a stick. If you're playing a life gain deck, it punishes you. If you're playing any kind of damage prevention, it punishes you. If you're playing a whole bunch of non-basic lands and not playing basics, which is kind of part of the course in Standard right now, at least outside of the ramp decks, this thing is going to punish the hell out of you. And the fact that sometimes some of those punishments are going to overlap with others, and you're going to get multiple layers of value at the same time, is super good on top of a 5/4 for 5. So is this good enough for Standard? Hard to say. It's really, we're gonna have to wait and see what Standard looks like after rotation. You gotta remember, a whole year worth of cards is rotating out, and we haven't seen all of the new cards in this Bloomburrow set, so it's really hard to gauge what Standard is gonna look like. But depending what Standard looks like after this set comes in, a card like this could be huge and just absolutely punishing the right decks. So, pretty cool card. Also cool to see a cat in the set, even though cat tribal isn't necessarily one of the major themes. Next up, we have Sugarcoat. This is 1 blue and 2 for an enchantment aura with flash, which is important. It enchants a creature or a food. An enchanted permanent is a colorless food artifact that you can pay 2, tap, and sacrifice to gain 3 life, and it loses all other card types and abilities. So, kind of interesting here that it can enchant a food. It seems like mechanically that's not going to be very relevant. I'm sure there is some edge case that I can't think of right now that will be relevant. If you can think of that, let me know in the comments. But I think it is absolutely a flavor win because it's called Sugarcoat. Being able to sugarcoat your food seems cute and quaint. But most of the time, you're going to play this at instant speed to enchant a creature and kind of, you know, use it as a combat trick. If they're swinging in with a creature and you can just turn it into a food at instant speed so that it doesn't do any damage to you, that seems pretty cool. It's going to lose all card types and abilities and just become a food. So nice instant speed creature removal in blue. Blue's always kind of digging for new ways to do creature removal that makes sense for blue, and I think this is a really cool thematic way of doing that. So it is worth noting, however, that turning it into a food is going to have some upsides, because there is a forage mechanic in this set where you can get some pretty insane value off of food tokens by using them to activate forage abilities. So being able to essentially turn that on for an opponent who might have a really good forage payoff could be a downside that you want to pay attention to. But either way, cool little piece of limited removal for blue here. Next up, we have Quaketusk Boar, another uncommon. It's just a 5/5 trample, haste, reach elemental boar for 2 red and 3. It's just good. It's just a big body. How far we've come with power creep that you can make a 5/5 for 5 with all of these keywords just simply an uncommon. And I'm not trying to say this card is, you know, too good to be an uncommon. I'm just trying to say that compared to the way Magic used to be back in the day, This card is insanely good. That being said, you know, of course, where the power level of Magic is at right now, it's just good enough to be an uncommon. But that being said, I think there are going to be plenty of aggressive mid-range decks in Limited that are going to want to run this guy and get a ton of value on turn 5 out of him. So it's also worth noting there are a lot of mana dorks in this set, or at least it seems like there are a lot of mana dorks in this set. So I think even in Limited, you're going to be able to consistently play this guy on turn 4 a lot more often than you would be able to in any other set's Limited format. So something to keep in mind, but just a really good aggressive card. I like it. Next up we have 𝐒𝑜𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛 Cosmos Caller, which is probably my favorite card of the day. This is a 3/3 legendary Bat Cleric for 3 mana in the colors of Orzhov. It has flying and vigilance, which that by itself is already pretty good. A 3/3 flying vigilance for 3 is pretty damn on rate. But whenever a bat you control's attacks, you gain 1 life. This will trigger for it. It will trigger for Deep Cavern Bat. It will trigger for whatever crazy other bats are coming in this set that we haven't seen yet. And it's important to note it's not whenever a bat or one or more bats you control attack. It's going to trigger for every single bat that attacks. So the deeper you're in Bat Tribal, the more triggers you'll get off this. So if there's some kind of cross-pollination between Bat Tribal synergies and life gain decks with life gain synergies, a card like this could be really, really insane. And that's before even getting to the best part of the card here, which is the last ability. When 𝐒𝑜𝑟𝑟𝑎𝑛 enters or attacks, you may pay 2 mana in the colors of Orzhov and 2 life, and when you do, you return target non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. That seems insane. The fact that this creature's already good enough without this ability and also has this insane, weird, slant-on Lurrus style ability tacked on just seems bonkers to me. It triggers when you play the card, it triggers every time that you attack with the card, and granted, you do have to actually attack with the card to get extra triggers and to be able to use this card multiple times, so it's not as good as Lurrus where you could just play stuff out of your yard, but there are some upsides where you can pay 2 mana to get a 3-drop with this. You don't have to pay the full 3 mana to get a 3-drop, and in fact, you can get a 3-drop, whereas with Lurrus, you could only get 2 drops. So there are ways in which this card is actually better than Lurrus, and I don't even know if Lurrus is the right comparison for this card, but it's definitely the first thing I could think of off the top of my head. And I think when you take this ability, this insane value that you can just keep triggering every single turn and add it on top of all the other stuff that this card does, it just seems insane to me. I'm super excited to try to build some kind of crazy Bat Tribal deck now and see if I can make it work with life gain, make those life gain triggers matter. It just seems super fun and awesome. And I can't wait to see what else is coming for bats, but let me know in the comments if you're as high on this card as I am, because I think it's absolutely amazing. Next up we have Heartfire Hero, 1 red mana for a 1/1 mouse soldier, and this has Valiant, which is one of the keywords that I brought up earlier in this video. So whenever Heartfire Hero becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. When Heartfire Hero dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So I'm really starting to see a mouse tribal deck take shape here, one that's very, very aggressive, and maybe mono red decks in Standard will actually start to move away from the prowess oriented stuff and start to dig deeper into mouse tribal here, because being able to sack this guy to do a whole bunch of damage to the opponent when it dies seems really good, when technically you could make it grow by +1/+1 every single turn, once a turn, and eventually turn 4, turn 5, it could be a 4/4 or 5/5, and actually do a significant amount of damage when it dies, which can get buffed even more by temporary instant speed combat tricks and stuff like that. So there's just a lot of potential with this, and as long as Mouse Tribal is good enough and aggressive enough, it could become the new mono red. So I'm interested to see if that's what happens. At the very least, that would flavorfully be a bit of a change for mono red, and it would be a little less annoying coming up against mono red decks on the ladder if that was the case. So I'm kind of rooting for Mouse Tribal to be a thing for mono red. This card's really cool. But next up we have Brambleguard Veteran. This is 2 green and 1 for a 3/4 Raccoon Warrior. And whenever you expend 4 raccoons you control, get +1/+1 and Vigilance until end of turn. So it's sort of a Lord, but it's a Lord that they can, you know, require you to jump through hoops to actually get the Lord abilities in order to make it an uncommon and not a rare. That's kind of my takeaway. But even a 3/4 for 4 that has this ability is pretty good, because you got to remember, you're expending 4 every single time you spend 4 or more mana in a turn to play a spell. So, or actually, not even to play a spell. If you've spent 4 or more mana in one turn on spells, you're going to trigger expend 4. So it's really, really easy to trigger these expend abilities just doing the stuff you're normally going to want to do. You don't have to spend extra mana to trigger it. You don't have to do something that's outside of, you know, what your normal play line would be. You just have to do enough on your turn. You have to play enough. So that's really easy to trigger, much easier than some other abilities we've seen in the past. And because of that, I think a card like this is a little bit better than it might appear on the surface, and I think Raccoon Tribal in Limited is absolutely going to want this guy. Hands down, high pick. I think he's just going to be way better in practice than people realize, just because of how often and how easy that expend 4 is actually going to trigger. Next up we have Brazen Collector. This is 1 red and 1 for a 2/1 Raccoon Rogue with First Strike. Let's go Coons. Whenever Brazen Collector attacks, you add 1 red mana, and until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So, it doesn't have haste or anything like what Mono Red is typically looking for these days, but a 2/1 First Strike for 2 that's giving you a mana back every single turn actually seems really good. Like, this would be decent even without the First Strike. The fact that it has First Strike and also counts as an outlaw and can get outlawed tribal payoffs, also counts as a raccoon, can get raccoon tribal payoffs. I just feel like there's a lot of silver lining value in this guy that's going to be very easy to miss on first inspection, and I would not be surprised if he actually ends up being worthy of being in a constructed deck. I don't know if that's a raccoon deck or an outlaw deck or what, but being able to swing in with First Strike, not have to worry about trading as much, and just generate this mana every single turn so that you can ramp things out in the process. You get your ramp and your aggro in the same card without having to pick and choose, and I kind of love that. So, I don't know, this card seems really good to me. We'll see where it goes. But that brings us to our last card of today, Iridescent Vine Lasher. One of my favorites, and one of the cards I'm honestly so scared of taking over the meta. Hear me out. This is a 1/2 Lizard Assassin for just 1 black mana, and it has Offspring 2. So you can pay an extra 2 mana as you cast it, and if you do, when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 token copy of it. Why is that relevant? Because both copies of the card will then have the second ability, which is a landfall ability. Whenever a land you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. So, worst case scenario, you can play this on 1, and every single land that enters the battlefield on your side for the rest of the game is going to ping your opponent for 1. That seems crazy in ramp decks, especially ramp decks that have access to any kind of sacrifice lands where you're sacrificing to search out a basic, and you can get double triggers off this. Now, the one thing that does help this guy not be too busted is the fact that New Capenna is rotating, so we're not going to have access to the 3-color fetch lands that came in New Capenna, where, you know, you sacrifice as soon as it enters the battlefield, gain a life, and search up whatever. Those cards would have made this absolutely gross and busted. Even without those, though, I think this card is still really, really good, especially when you consider you can play one on turn 1, and then if you draw into a second copy later in the game, just pay 3 mana and you have 2 more. If you have 3 of these guys on the field, and you're lightning bolting your opponent's head every time you play a land, that just seems insane. And all of a sudden, all of the ramp decks now, they don't even need big win conditions. You just play this guy. It just seems nuts to me. I don't know. Am I over-evaluating this thing? Because it just seems like it's completely busted. Like I said, not as busted with the New Capenna lands rotating out, but still seems crazy. And it seems like every ramp deck under the sun is just going to want to build around this from this point forward. But I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you think I'm crazy, or if you think this is cracked, or if you can think of some crazy card to combo this with that I haven't thought of, because I'm super curious, super scared of this card. Obviously gonna brew with it during early access though, because it's just too crazy and I have to see it pop off. But that's gonna do it for today. Shorter video today, but there will be a ton more spoilers coming tomorrow, so definitely pay attention to my channel. More videos will be coming. I have a ton of shorts that I'll be putting up as well, detailing each card one at a time. So if you're interested in that, you're interested in seeing any new cards that might pop out between now and tomorrow's video, I am gonna link that spoiler short playlist in the description and in the comments. So check that out. If you missed yesterday's video where we, spoiled almost all of, just a ton of cards, all of the cards that were spoiled yesterday, way more than were in this video, definitely check that video out as well, and that's a part of that playlist, so that's included in that link you'll find below. And make sure you like the video if you haven't already, because it's you guys liking the video that's helping this channel to grow so fast. We just hit 2K subscribers. 2K? No, 10K subscribers. Can you tell I'm tired? It's fine though. We're gonna do the damn thing. Subscribe if you're new, because I have a ton more on the way. I'm gonna go get some dinner. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.